All right, good afternoon and welcome to this Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Update Forum. I'm Alex Lukowski, Executive Director of Media Relations. Almost exactly 4 months ago, our host today spoke with Dr. Gerald on his program about her sense of where UMB is when it comes to EDI issues and the course she was setting to help us get to where we need to be. I was reminded at that time of one of my favorite thinkers on the subject and read this quote from Cornel West's Race Matters. None of us alone can save the nation or the world, but each of us can make a positive difference if we commit ourselves to do so. Now, with all due respect to Dr. West, he may have left one thing out, and that is that the work we do can be so much more productive and impactful with the right leadership and the right team in place to help us do that work. So one of the very, very important things we're going to do today is meet and hear from our EDI team, the whole team now in position and ready to go. And many of us have had a chance to hear from and speak with the leader of UMB's EDI team, Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer and Vice President, Dr. Diane Forbes Berthoud. But if you can believe it, this is only her 8th month on campus. So I want to take a moment and remind everyone about her background and what she's already done. As I mentioned, Dr. Forbes Berthoud started last July as our inaugural Chief EDI Officer and Vice President. And that last part is extremely important because Dr. Gerald was determined to make her position cabinet level position, a direct report to the president, something he felt was essential for her to be able to lead and foster the change that we need in all areas of the university. And that is the mission of her job and her team's job, to catalyze the institutional change necessary to deepen and strengthen UMB's commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm not going to recount her whole professional history because we don't have time to do that, but I will say in the last 10 years prior to her arrival at UMB, Dr. Forbes Berthoud held a number of key positions at the University of California, San Diego. She was founding faculty member of the RISE San Diego Urban Leadership Fellows Program, which worked to advance leadership, workforce development, and civic engagement. As academic director and lecturer in UCSD's 4,000 students 6th college, she oversaw academic and strategic planning and implementation. She served on the Chancellor's Committee on the Status of Women, developed and enhanced the Global Education Program, and was honored with a UCSD Diversity Award for outstanding efforts in advancing the school's academic and institutional EDI goals. And most recently, she served as Associate Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Now, in that role, she led the management of the university's first strategic plan for inclusive excellence, directed central aspects of an accountability process, which involved senior leadership, and provided leadership in developing an accountability data dashboard, or I should say more than one dashboard, to track key metrics, and oversaw the creation of an equity, diversity, and inclusion best practices resource and diversity strategic planning toolkit to guide the planning and implementation process. Now, ever since Dr. Forbes Berthoud arrived here in Baltimore, and actually if I think about it, even before she arrived in Baltimore, she's been very clear on her approach. She's called it systemic, strategic, and sustainable. And she's been just as clear about the importance she places on data, data-driven decisions, and evidence-based strategies. So, first steps in these past several months have been gathering some of that data along with the ideas and perspectives of people all across our community. In a few moments, we're going to hear much more about that and what we can expect in the near future. We're also, as I said, going to hear from her team, and then you'll have a chance to ask questions. Please use the Q&A function for that. When the time comes, we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question. If you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. Just let us know that, and I'll read the question for you. This program is, of course, being recorded for later posting on the website. One last thing, and it's a very important thing. At the end of this event, you'll be redirected to a brief survey. Please take just a couple of minutes and give our EDI team your feedback. This is a community effort, and we need everyone to participate. Now, please welcome Dr. Diane Forbes Berthoud.
Good afternoon, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone, UMB community, and thank you to my team for joining. What an amazing introduction. I really appreciate Alex's emphasis on the collective element of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'll be pleased to share my screen with you now. And I look forward to talking with you about what we've been doing as a team and what I've been working on for the last few months since my arrival in July, and then since my team has arrived, what we've been doing. Hope you're well today. And even though the weather is great, I'm glad that you're spending some time to join us. And if you're joining us after, we look forward to hearing from you by email. So today, what I'd love to talk with you about is so far, what have I been up to? I've been in conversations with many of you, just really talking about how those conversations have gone, what I've learned. And then I'll be previewing some upcoming initiatives and introducing my new team that's going to help us advance as a campus as it relates to institutional equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then we'll open it up to you for question and answer. So we look forward to our time together. So in terms of updates and how I've approached this work, Alex previewed some of that, and I'd like to reiterate for those of you who might be new to hearing from me or hearing from the office, here's some key areas that I have been focused on and that I know are what I would call a winning approach to equity, diversity, and inclusion planning and implementation. First, and if you were part of the MLK celebration yesterday, actually, Dr. Brown mentioned some of these kinds of issues that Dr. King had a dream, but he also had a plan. In other words, the civil rights movement had a plan. And in many cases, we need to have that. So as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's quite similar. It's important for us to be strategic about what we're doing, to have key ideas, metrics, ways forward, and a plan to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion and enhance our initiatives. And we'll be talking further about that. Secondly, it's really important to have an approach that's systemic, looking across the entire institution and the ways in which the work that we're doing is connected, interrelated, and the ways that we can enhance what's happening in one school or unit or division and another school or department or division. And so although there are 7 schools and multiple administrative units, as we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have to address the silos that currently exist and work towards greater cohesion and connectedness across our work. Work that we're going to be doing related to recruitment or retention or affinity groups and those kinds of things, it's important to increase and improve our communication across those areas so that we understand University of Maryland, Baltimore as a full system that can move forward together. And so the work that we're doing strategically and systemically is important to set in place. It's important for us to set in place structures, to set in place practices and policies so that what we do will be sustainable. So that it's not something we'll start today and then it ends tomorrow, or the sunrise this moment and then sunset in another moment, but that these efforts over time will strengthen the institution, increase our profile, improve the experience of faculty, staff, and students here. So the first key area that I'd like to spend a moment discussing is equity, diversity, and inclusion strategic planning, implementation, and accountability. So over the last few months in conversations with many of you, I've been asked, okay, who have you talked to? You know, what have you been up to? What are the areas that are key areas of priority? A key area of priority is starting first with what we know, what we have learned from the data, both qualitative data and quantitative data. So some of my time has been understanding the diversity and the data landscape, if you will, to see, well, where are there sources of data related to access, who is a part of the institution, who is growing in the institution, who's progressing through the institution, retention rates, graduation rates, faculty, staff, students, and progress throughout the institution, time to tenure, and so on. And I found a number of different sources of data, and I really appreciate all the conversations across the schools and central administration as well to understand where those pieces of data are. So one of the practices that I think might be helpful to us is developing a university dashboard. And so in collaboration with the areas related to IT and related to human resources and looking across the schools at the various dashboards and pieces of data that we have, I've been working with our senior colleagues to create a more coherent picture of our data. So a dashboard would help us to get to that. And then finally, also learning more about the quantitative assessments that exist. And so there have been surveys that have been administered centrally for faculty, for staff, and for students over the last 5 or so years. I think in some cases it's been administered twice, I think with the Gallup instrument, and for students surveyed twice as well. And I think that I know there's also a plan for it to be administered again this spring. And so as we think about those, we're just looking at them again to see, are we asking the questions we need to be asking? Are we learning as much as we can about the experiences of staff, of faculty, of students? And what are the ways in which we can glean and gather more in-depth data about experience, climate, micro, macroaggressions, and differences across or within populations? And so working to learn what those surveys offer, working with our expert colleagues across campus to think about ways that we might improve that assessment so that we have something on which to build our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategic planning. So how will we know what those areas of foci are? it will be looking at the data, talking with many of you, as I've been doing already, and my team will continue to do that over the next few months to learn more. Another key area broadly is capacity building, program development, and leadership development. And one of the areas that's been an area of focus is faculty development and diversity. And this doesn't by any means capture everything, but these are some of the key areas in the first few months that I've been able to develop. The campus has a membership with the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, NCFDD. And I've learned we have this membership. Some faculty know about it, some don't. Some areas use it more than others. But there is a faculty success program that the NCFDD offers. And early on in the first few months, I was able to, with some of the deans, co-sponsor diverse faculty who are underrepresented in their disciplines to be a part of this faculty success program. And what it is, and if someone is on the call who is a part of this, I would love to chime in the Q&A to share any of your experiences. That would be awesome. I won't call their names here. But I was able to sponsor, along with the deans, 1 to 2 faculty members who are underrepresented in their disciplines to be a part of this program that involves coaching, mentoring. You can work on a writing project. You get to meet diverse faculty from across the US and in multiple disciplines, and you can be in various cohorts to improve and strengthen your faculty research, teaching, and service if those are your goals. And then in conversation with faculty, as well as reviewing and studying best practices in faculty diversity and development, building affinity groups are always very helpful for any group, in fact, to be among persons who are either like-minded in terms of discipline, identity-based, or expertise. And so thinking about and brainstorming with faculty leaders about establishing any kinds of affinity groups in collaboration with academic affairs. And so that could be a faculty of color network, women's network, other groups, depending on the need and the concern. I've heard from 1 or 2 which ones we might start with at first. And while my office won't run it per se, we can be co-sponsors and help to bring speakers in and establish a forum that faculty can do this, as well as fund and advance this. I've also begun collaborations in academic affairs with an initiative which is hopefully going to be getting started in the next 6 to 9 months, which is the Faculty Fellows Initiative for Equitable Teaching, Writing, Research, and Assessment. And this initiative is focused on anti-racist pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy, and ways in which we might develop our faculty who are interested in these areas to improve and enhance the experience of students in learning environments. And so that requires support on our behalf, and both co-sponsorship financially, as well as resources and elevating those kinds of initiatives through my office, all in collaboration with academic affairs and working with various unit leaders, as well as faculty who are interested in this. This is still in development, but these are some of the conversations that I'm having in those areas. I'm also involved, I love this part of my job, and it's not to say I don't love all the other parts, but I have begun working with the President's Symposium. And so this is a group of graduate students who are interested year by year in writing a white paper and making recommendations to our leadership about what could be improved at UMB. And in past years, my understanding was there was a focus on global education. There was also a focus on sustainability. Their work also contributed to the development of the Community Engagement Center and so forth. And so this year, their strategic focus is on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I've been asked to be a mentor, and I'm so pleased to be a part of that. And so being a part of that means I get to listen to their work and their ideas, as well as help to guide and inform some of what they're working on. And so this year, their focus is on inclusive and diverse leadership and how to diversify our leadership, as well as to help leadership to be more inclusive. And also, similar to the Faculty Fellows, they'll be working on and learning more about culturally responsive pedagogy, anti-racism, and other areas related to curricular and co-curricular development. So that said, I expect that we all over time will receive recommendations from them about how equity, diversity, and inclusion in these specific areas could be advanced. And they're offering their ideas, their research, and their recommendations from a student perspective, which is so very important. Another key part of what I've been working on, which is really some of the areas that I mentioned before, are the strengthening DEI infrastructure. And so, yes, we have an office. Yes, each school is developing or have already assigned, appointed, or hired a DEI officer, an assistant, or associate dean of diversity. So I've been working in collaboration with them to learn more about their areas, first of all, and to build a network there and to build collaboration and cohesion among us so that we can have a stronger network and encourage and work and learn with each other, which I think is really amazing. And so working on understanding the DEI infrastructure here, as well as building one out that's stronger and with greater enhancement, is something that's been a focus. And then overall, and this list is not at all complete, I've been in many places, in many meetings, as many of you all know, staff, faculty, student meetings, and have been asked at different points, which is what I'd love for all of you to know, that our office is a resource for you. We are leading the equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, and also partnering with many of you in so many different areas. And so this is just a sample of, and the next slide has some as well, of offices where I've spoken and shared ideas, as well as listened to you, and initiatives that my office has helped to advance, such as proposals or efforts to advance diversity in biomedical research, the Green Bomb Comprehensive Cancer Center. I've worked on and consulted on mentorship proposals, partnered with and had great meetings with Cure Scholars Philanthropy to talk about how to integrate and advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in that work, and also partnered with communication and marketing to learn more about their work, as well as to integrate equity, diversity, and inclusion even more. International operations and global education is being built out even more, and they have a great plan to go forward, working with public health colleagues too, and recently met some months ago, and I know that the institutional learning outcomes are something that this group is working on, BPAG, the Best Practices and Assessment Group. And so I've been pleased to meet with them, learn about their work, as well as present and collaborate on how we might measure equity, diversity, and inclusion goals in student learning outcomes. System-wide, there's also work in which UMB is involved, and I'm pleased to represent the university there along with other colleagues. In May 2022, there is going to be a convening on health disparities. It's a symposium. It's going to involve the system universities, and it's going to be held at Towson in May. And the focus is going to be on how we address and eliminate health disparities, and looking at the curriculum specifically and how we prepare future students to be the kinds of professionals that, in fact, in our strategic plan, we talk about professionals who are purposeful and engaged contributors to society, is I think a partial quote of the strategic plan. And so I'm really excited, along with some of our colleagues at UMB, to be a part of this system convening and helping to plan that so that we can help to inform what's happening in higher education and specifically in the USM. There's also a diversity council where we've met with other DEI officers and people who are leads in those areas. So meeting with colleagues at Coppin State and College Park and Eastern Shore and so on to understand what's the state of the discipline, so to speak, and what are the best practices that you're implementing on your campus from which we can learn, and vice versa. So it's been a really exciting time since July, learning not only at UMB, but in the system. And of course, having my experience coming from the West, although previously from Maryland, and combining all of those great experiences here in work with you. So it's been a full agenda, and there's so much more that could be captured here. And as you can imagine, it's really been exciting to have a team on board. So I think this is the final update that I'll provide. And as it relates to staff, as it relates to hiring, promotion, and retention, one of the areas that when we talk about systemic and being strategic about our work in equity, diversity, and inclusion, a key area is thinking about our policies and practices. So what's been instituted, and we need to formalize this in a policy, and we certainly have done this for the dean searches, is I've been able to institute, working with our leaders, on contributions to diversity statement. This is actually standard practice in some faculty hires and in some administrative hires in parts of higher education. And what this is a statement in which a candidate who is hoping to work here at UMB or anywhere in higher education would indicate, here's what I've done to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in my community, in my previous employment, what I plan to do here at UMB. And that could be looking at groups that have been started, things related to assessment, mentorship, advising, program planning and development, promotion of diverse persons, whatever it is, this can be captured here in a statement. And we will talk about over time how this also is impacted or plays into appraisals or promotions and those kinds of things. But at the moment, it will be for new searches, directors and above, and we'll start there, and hopefully over time we can build it out. And in consultation with you, we'd love to hear how we might leverage this in other areas. Also a part of the search process and the hiring and recruitment process is developing and delivering an implicit bias or anti-bias training to all search committees. This is done in parts of the university already in some schools, but it's not a standard practice across the institution. So we have currently going a School of Medicine search, we have a School of Law Dean search, and there are other searches that will be started sometime this year and other searches that will be closing sometime this year as well. And so as a practice, we would like to have that offered either out of our office and or in collaboration with our partners in the schools and in human resources. And so all of these kinds of changes and new practices or standardized practices require collaboration with human resources leadership. I know we will be hiring for a role of someone who will be the CHRO, the Chief Human Resources Officer. And so in collaboration with leadership and working with my office and human resources broadly, we hope to continue to learn more about what the current practices are, as well as make recommendations for ways to go forward to enhance equity, diversity, and inclusion campus-wide. Of course, that's been a mouthful. Of course, there's so much more to do. And it's so wonderful to be in this office and to work with all of you. I've met some amazing people. And although, yes, some days I'm tired, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I need to rest. I need to go on the trail. I need to do something else. I get up another day. I'm really excited because there's so much more to do. And I look forward to doing that together with you and with the new team that I've hired. And so upcoming will be a more strategic plan around how we plan to do EDI strategic planning. Continued development of building out DEI or EDI infrastructure. There will be more engagement with the campus, and all the initiatives and more will continue to build on those and enhance those. No one person can do this, and I've said this from pre-hire, pre-entry to this moment. It requires a village, a collective effort on your part, and of course, it requires an amazing team. And so I'm very pleased that as of January 3rd and then January 18th, respectively, I was able to hire Ms. Reetta Gach and Mr. Bill Joyner. Reetta will serve and is serving as my new executive assistant, and you'll hear from her shortly. And Mr. Bill Joyner, very familiar to all of you as well, and he will be the director for campus-wide EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So now over to the amazing team that will be working in collaboration with me to make the magic happen. Bill.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes Berthoud. Hi, everybody. Like Dr. Forbes Berthoud mentioned, my name is Bill Joyner, and I'm really excited to come back to UMB as the new director for the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. The office is new to the university, and so I'm obviously new to the office, but this new role actually combines the responsibilities of my recent position as the equity officer for the Baltimore Police Department and director of DEI there, and my previous experience as a longtime member of the UMB community, first as a staff member and resident of nearby communities, and then as a student, and then as a staff member and student again between 2011 and 2020. And so my new role here will really be focusing on building infrastructure for campus-wide collective action to address issues of EDI. And so, what does that mean? What does that look like? I can give a few examples right now. So first, I'll be managing the campus-wide diversity strategic planning process. So that's the collecting and crystallizing our collective vision as a campus, and translating that vision into a plan of how to get there together. And so that includes, developing concrete outcomes, strategic outcomes, and shared goals, developing tactics to reach those goals, timelines and budgets to predict and manage the resources needed to execute those tactics, and accountability measures to assess our impact and promote the effectiveness of those efforts. I'll also be developing and managing projects and managing programs that provide campus-wide impact and or address institutional challenges. So this is, developing policies, launching and managing web-based resources, trainings, those kinds of things. So I'm really excited to be working on this and working on this with all of you, the campus village. And I'm especially excited to do this with this team, including my colleague, Miss Reetta Gach, who I will pass the baton to now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Reetta Gach, and as mentioned, I'm the executive assistant to Diane Forbes Berthoud. I find the easiest way to remember the pronunciation of my first name is to spell it phonetically, R-A-Y-T-A, and it's pronounced Reetta. Though I'm not new to the university, I am new to EDI. I started working at the university in 2013 as an executive assistant in the School of Medicine's dean's office. I think my career here is somewhat unique in that I've experienced the university from different perspectives. I've worked in dean's offices, operations, and the legal department with students. I've launched new initiatives. I've led teams. I've been a team member, and I've supported programs and planned events. My experience has helped me to fully understand and believe that we are one university with 7 schools and make up a diverse population of students, faculty, and staff. I'm thankful to be part of a rich community full of opportunities to learn and grow. I've participated in Emerging Leaders, Management Essentials, the first umbrella coaching cohort, and I purchased a home in 2020 through Live Near Your Work program. I'm really invested in our campus community as well as our surrounding communities. My education, my work experience, and the relationships I've built here on campus have brought me here today to work in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. In this role, as an executive assistant, I will manage and co-manage projects, provide VP executive support. I will, and manage communications. With that said, I'm the person to reach out to if you have ideas about events and want assistance with promoting, co-sponsoring, or hosting events. I'm honored to have the opportunity to work in a department that will be essential in the advancement of all of us at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce myself, and I'm looking forward to working with you. I'll turn it back over to Diane Forbes Berthoud now.
Reetta, thank you so much. And thank you as well, Bill. And so as you all can see, we are here. We are ready to be engaged with you. There's a lot that has already been happening since July, and since the year started, we have hit the ground running in 2022. So very pleased to have Bill on board, very pleased to have Reetta on board, and very happy now to talk with all of you. And so at this time, we're going to turn it back to Alex. Thank you all for your attention and your engagement. The numbers are really high, Alex. We have over 222 people on this call.
I know, it's great.
So that's really amazing. And so I am going to stop share and I will turn it over to Alex to put the questions to us. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again.
I tell you what, I'm going to have to ask Bill and Reetta after the event how I can get one of those cool cartoon characters that's personalized. I don't feel cool. I don't have one of those. But let's get right to questions. We have a lot of questions. Thank you for putting your questions in the Q&A. Please continue to do that. I'm sure there are a lot of new questions have been raised beyond the ones people came with. Well, I was going to go to Bern Manari with a question, but Bern has dropped off, I think. Oh no, Bern is there. Bern, you had a question about affinity groups. Do you want to ask that?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Bern. How
Awesome.
are you?
Hi, it's so good to see you again, Dr. Forbes
Same,
Berthoud.
pleasure.
I'm so glad that you made it here. Unfortunately, it seems like you haven't really reached out to some of the student groups that you had mentioned. I was actually lucky enough to be in both of your interviews, both yours and Bill's, and I was so impressed with your credentials, but we haven't heard from you as students leading a queer affinity group. I am personally the president of the Queer Student Alliance, and I also work very closely with other queer groups on campus. You said you've been here since July. It's February. We haven't heard from you, and I'm a little worried about that going forward, considering that this is the Equity and Diversity and Inclusion Office.
Thank you, Bern. Thanks for your question and your comment. So I have been to about 4 different student meetings, and I think what I've done is met with the USGA. And so I've been to, I think, 2 of those meetings, and I also met with the executive board. The smaller affinity groups from the USGA, I have yet to meet with. I was also contacted by the exact name is slipping me now, but they are students who are African descended. So there's a list. Reetta will tell you that she inherited. I've made it through half of my onboarding meetings. And Abby Plusson, I don't mean to be calling names out. She is a staff member who reached out to me also from the queer community among staff. She's on my to meet list as well. And I apologize, I'm not seeing on my list
So
your name or.
Yeah, we're called the Queer Student Alliance.
Okay.
And I can send you an email with my information. But I mean, respectfully, we're not really a small group. There are many queer students on campus, and it's been a little frustrating to see that you've worked exclusively through USGA to reach the students. Because USGA, while it has great power, doesn't always reach every set of students. So I think maybe something we would look for going forward would be perhaps reaching out to individual schools, graduate student, like their student associations, because that would allow you to accurately reach each school's worth of students as well as the broader community.
Absolutely. Thanks for your comment, question.
That sounds like a great suggestion.
Yeah.
I'm just going to echo that, and you know, it's good to have these kind of questions come in because you know it's impossible to cover all ground. It's easy to miss someone, a group, even a large group, and so I really appreciate, and I know Dr. Forbes Berthoud, I'm sure appreciates that you made that a question out here. I want to bring in Courtney Bergen, another group that often gets, and this came up at another event recently. Do I see Courtney? Oh, I don't see Courtney. See, some people have dropped off. And yes, well, I'm gonna read her question. She asked, can you discuss how disability will be integrated into EDI initiatives beyond existing compliance-based programs?
So how EDI will be integrated in various initiatives?
Right, how disability issues will be integrated into EDI programs beyond what's mandated, beyond mandated programs.
Absolutely, this is great. So we are partners with that office, and I've already received tips for how we should conduct our programs. I've been contacted by students who have questions about issues related to disability. So let's continue our partnership. If there's something our office needs to know, or if there's someone you'd like to meet with, we'll drop the email in the chat. And so thinking about the first question as well as other questions that will come up, I've been an office of one until January 3rd. And so you can imagine one person meeting all these groups. It's been exciting and overwhelming, as well as now that we've built more capacity, we can do more for sure. So we are partners and collaborators. I've met with that office and I've met with some students. As you have questions and queries, and as we plan out the strategic planning process, these are core groups that we plan to meet with.
There's a great anonymous question that I want to read to you, and it you know, I'm sure you've encountered some of this as you've talked to lots of people on campus, but there are probably a lot of people you haven't spoken to or haven't spoken up. The questioner writes, what's the plan for addressing the discomfort that many, not all, but many faculty and staff have with just discussing race relations in our city and in the institution? You know, people, you know, that hesitance holds them back from really fully participating. What can you do about that?
I think we have to continue some of the work that has already been done. There's great work happening across the schools. We're still learning what all of those are, and this is part of what we mean by strengthening the DEI infrastructure. So I really appreciate all the efforts in the schools with the Associate and Assistant Deans of Diversity, with the Intercultural Center, with the various student, faculty, staff groups. So one, we hope to collaborate and co-sponsor and elevate that work. And I hope with the speakers that we bring here, the strategic planning process that we're going to be starting and the focus groups that we hope to have, that we can continue to have those conversations. Each one has to be comfortable at their own rate, their own level of engagement, and we'll create those kinds of opportunities to engage. Of course, as an institution and as an office, we won't be able to solve centuries of concerns and questions. However, we can, I wouldn't say begin, we can continue together to listen, to learn. I know there are book clubs and a number of schools and various programs, so we can think about those kinds of things. And we'll talk with you about some of the plans once they are solidified that we hope to launch through the office.
Great. This is a question we talked about before the program. We were kind of reviewing some of the things you might discuss. And I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. I'm going to bring in Melissa Vithuis. Maybe you can help me out. Are you with us? Melissa?
Hi.
Melissa, tell me how to pronounce your name. So if I run into you, I don't want to get it wrong twice.
That's okay. It's Melissa Weishaus.
Weishaus. Okay, thank you. All right, well, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if I interpreted this correctly, but what I saw from the PowerPoint is that implicit bias training is being offered to faculty in sort of leadership positions. But just to give you some background, I'm one of the radiation oncology faculty members at University of Maryland Medical Center, and what we found in our department is that not just our faculty are our attendings or physicians, but a lot of our admins and everyone in our department wants more implicit bias training. Is that something that you are planning to do in the future for everyone at UMB, or what are your plans for that?
As much as there's capacity, we can. I mean, this is the reason for searches for director and above. We started there. We're an office, really in terms of providing training, it would be me and or Bill. So with capacity, and if there is interest in, which is something I did in my previous institution, a fellows program where people are trained to be EDI fellows, if you will. Over time, I was able to work with 4 or 5 different cohorts to do this. That's a model where something like train the trainer, not only to train people, but also to be facilitators and to be book club leads and to be developers. And so over time, as we build capacity, we may be able to do that throughout the institution. I know that there are other resources in the schools and the Intercultural Center as well. So we can work on it.
I know you're a big believer in having systems that reinforce the things we should be doing. So this is sort of a follow-up. This is an anonymous question following up to a different angle on this hiring issue. Person writes, for faculty hires, a diverse interview panel is required. For executive leadership positions, directors and up, when is that going to be a requirement?
Well, that's the recommendation for, that's a best practice for search committees. So we can make that recommendation. And in many cases for the searches that we're talking about here, Alex, many of us among our deans, our associate deans, our VPs, associate VPs, AVPs, and so forth, many of us are actually quite diverse already. We could be even more diverse. And so that's part of my role to encourage that. And I'm serving on some of those search committees myself. The requirement is something we can talk about in HR.
All right, let's bring in Sandra Quezada. You know her. She has a question.
Hi, Sandra.
Hey, Sandra, are you there?
I'm sorry, Dr. Quezada.
Hi, yes.
Hello.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. And my question, I got very excited hearing you talk about affinity groups. That's definitely something I know we need to do a better job of building out, at least in the School of Medicine, especially for our faculty. We have a lot of really dynamic student groups, but we're lacking for the faculty. We know that there are 2 existing affinity groups that are for faculty and staff across the campus, the Stonewall Pride group and also the Latinos Unidos at UMB, our Latino faculty affinity group. Historically, these groups, as at least I know for the Unidos at UMB, this group hasn't really had any kind of funding support for any of our activities. We're all sort of paying out of pocket to, which, it's okay, but I think it really has sort of slowed the progress and engagement and maybe even interest in some of our activities. I just think we could accomplish a lot more. So when I heard you said that there might be some co-sponsoring opportunities, yes. I was hoping to hear some examples of that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks, Dr. Quezada. So yes, so the affinity groups, not just a best practice for faculty, for staff as well. The co-sponsorships can be for events, receptions, book clubs, speakers, as well as promotion and marketing through our office, which little or no cost in so many ways. And or if there are things that the group might like to do with national groups or other higher education groups or system groups, that can be co-sponsored from my office. And I would love to learn more about the funding models here for some of those groups that currently exist. who would the co-sponsorship be with, so that I can partner with my colleague lead in that area to make that happen. So these are very important.
I have another anonymous question here. It's one that, in fairness, you cannot answer, I don't think, unless you're more prepared than even I think you are. And I think you're incredibly prepared. So, but because we talked about data and the importance of data, I thought maybe you'd want to address this. The questioner writes, can you share any of the HR data trends, promotional trends, resignation trends, whether or not minority faculty staff members that resigned were placed at other institutions in a higher position? Maybe you don't have that handy, but this is the kind of thing people do want to know. They want to know the data that you talked about.
Yeah, so that's been part of the few months coming in. And Bill, if you want to chime in at any point here, because we've talked about data a bit. So some of the things that I've learned among faculty in particular is that there's this is not a surprise, but I've seen the raw numbers. There's underrepresentation of Black and brown faculty, so broadly faculty of color across many disciplines, particularly in the STEM disciplines. And representation that I've been looking at as well is looking at representation in the state and representation on campus. So in some of those groups, there is a 1/3 or less representation of Black and brown faculty as compared to the regional stats or the demographics in the state. And then among students, Black and LGBT, almost said faculty students, have reported from the climate surveys not feeling as welcome, or that they had to change or alter part of their identity to quote, fit in. And so we've seen that in some of the quantitative data as well. The separation data, I cannot speak to that definitively. I know that the campus, we're talking about exit interviews, stay interviews, and what those might mean, so we might learn more. But broadly, I'll turn it to Bill as well, because this is related to strategic planning. If not speaking to the trends per se, I think it's important from our perspective and the office's perspective to know what we know in the data and how that's going to inform strategic planning. So I can, Bill, if you'd like to add something.
Yeah, and so Dr. Forbes Berthoud mentioned some of the data and trends that we have already looked at. And one of the major questions then is sort of like, how do we make this information available in a usable way for campus stakeholders to be able to leverage that information to create improvements? And this is campus-wide, because we know that the trends are not uniform across the different academic units, the schools, and for staff, they're also not uniform between the schools and the administrative units. And so identifying ways like through the data, and also as Dr. Forbes Berthoud mentioned in the earlier part of the presentation about enhancing the infrastructure needed to collect this data so it is comparable across units and also against other institutions in the wider market, will help us identify sort of like what are the areas of greatest priority and are the most actionable to address disparities across disciplines, across units, and across populations in the institution. And that is a major part, that assessment and data infrastructure is a major part of our early agenda for strategic planning that will be beginning this year.
Thank you, Bill. Next question.
All right, I know you're looking at a lot of the tools that we use now and to see whether they're appropriate, if they could be better. I want to bring in Bonnie Bissonette, who has a question, and it speaks to one of the things that we see at least once a year that may not be working the way we want it to. Bonnie, are you there?
I am, thank you. And thank you so much to all of you for this really great presentation. I'm excited. I know we have a meeting on the books, Dr. Forbes Berthoud, later on this month, and I look forward to that. But my question is about the annual diversity training tools and the way it's delivered at UMB. I'm a little experienced, i.e. old, and have taken and done a lot of these over the years. And I think they could be more engaging. I think I know, speaking for myself and being just honest, is I go through them and they look very familiar every year and the case studies are the same. And I'm just wondering if you've given thought to any changes to those tools and how we might reinvigorate that sort of training. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Great question. Good to virtually hear you. I look forward to meeting with you later this month. I can start here. Bill, I encourage any feedback from you. Yes, I've taken these trainings as well now in 2 state systems and in private institutions as well. First thing is, equity, diversity, inclusion training of any kind is difficult. It's complex. The material is difficult, and not just difficult as in the content at times, but the emotional, the personal elements and structural and social elements and societal elements that are a part of this just make it tough work to do, and even more challenging in an online format. So I am not here to say we shouldn't do it online. It has to be in person because there's so many of us. How do we deliver to tens of thousands of people across the system? Please know that in the system, as in USM, we've been talking about the trainings that we offer and how we can have this be more effective. I am more of a fan myself of face-to-face, interactive, small group and individual breakout, 1 to 2 type interaction, so we can talk about that. And I would love to talk with you and other campus experts about how we enhance and improve that kind of training. I'll also mention that the research actually says training is not as effective in equity, diversity, and inclusion integration. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything, because there's some place for education and engagement here. But this is an invitation to those of you who have feedback about the online tools and or the face-to-face trainings that of which you've been a part, to share with us what you think could be done. Bill, any thoughts about training and enhancing that?
Yes, this is something we have been working on, and HR has actually already had this on their agenda. And so we are in the early stages of partnering of how to not only address some of like the mandatory trainings and improve them, but like what are trainings that are missing? If the current trainings are addressing the same old things in the same old ways, what are ways that training on deeper levels to broader populations about more specific topics that are applicable to UMB's experience can be applied to in-person, live, whatever way is most accessible, and ways where we can identify how effective the learning outcomes are and how they're applied to the campus. And so we're working through what does that look like for existing training programs and what gaps may need to be filled. Of course, there are questions that we have to explore as an institution, like, well, if this is what it takes to get there, what will the resources be required in order to get there, and when? So yes, this is something that has been identified as an area of need. Right now, we're in the process of figuring out who are the stakeholders that should be most involved in the process of reshaping these outcomes. How will we know we're successful in reshaping them? And what are the most appropriate sort of like targets for when we should be able to see implementation of some of these new activities? So lots to come on that topic.
Excellent,
Yeah, following up to that, someone writes, I'm glad you talked about training. That's very important. And Diane, you pointed out that it's really not as effective as other means. Someone writes that one thing that students repeatedly express is that training and encouraging people to follow policies, and they write, does not work. How do you see your office's role in expanding beyond trainings and encouragement? In other words, when does this become real enforceable policy?
Yeah, this is tricky and complex. I would share that placing the kinds of policies and structures in place that signal, first of all, this is a priority for the institution, and also here's an expectation for growth and development and evaluation here, that over time, if this is not favorable to an employee or a student or a faculty member, they may or may not choose to be a part of our community. But we're hoping that we will embrace the values of inclusion and believe that each person is valuable and should be able to work here, study here, research here, and move forward. So I do believe the policies matter and they are important. The statements, the training, to diversify our leadership, to diversify all levels of the institution, because it is that experience with persons who are not like ourselves, and that experience with new and different ideas and backgrounds and heritages and orientations and nationalities and so forth, that we will actually be able to learn and grow. Now, we can try all of those things, and there will be some persons, resistors, who are not the early or mid-level adopters, who will never embrace some of these values. And part of how I think about that is we live with that. And we're hoping that over time, it will be a set of values and practices that we will all embrace. This is not just a UMB project, this is a national, this is a global project. And so we are, in our work, we have to be concerned with what's now, but we also have to be thinking about the end game and the long game, if you will, is really what I want to say. And we're on a long range project here to change systems and societies. And so we have to start with something. And so we're starting with some of those policies and practices.
if I can just jump in too, is that training should never stand alone. Like the question talks about, like training doesn't work. Like if training is tried to be, if the attempt is to implement training and have that be a solution, it's never going to succeed, right? Training is the middle of, a process that begins with setting expectations through policy. And then the training provides the knowledge, skills, and abilities that employees or students need to be able to meet those higher expectations. And then after the training is delivered, then you use accountability measures, including things like performance evaluations. For students would be things like grades and other measures, but for staff and faculty, it's evaluation, et cetera, of like, so how well are they applying the knowledge, skills, and abilities to meet those expectations? And so, there are three legs to that stool. It cannot stand on the single leg of training. So that's what we're trying to think holistically, campus-wide. What are the expectations? Are they aligned to the trainings? Are the trainings aligned to the accountability measures? And are those accountability measures really closely tied to what the actual expectations are in the policy? And so it's that sort of holistic view that it takes to make each of those things work together, not standing alone.
If we waited a few minutes, I know we'd get the follow-up, but I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and ask it. And that is, you mentioned expectations. Are we doing enough, or what do we need to do so that everyone understands those expectations? I mean, sometimes we have core values, we express things, but are we really making it clear what our expectations are?
I wanted to, thanks for the question, Alex. It's going to, I think, bolster and enhance the responses that we provide. So this, what Bill just mentioned, is the demonstration and the fulfillment, if you will, of what systemic actually looks like. And so, any one thing that we do in a school, any one activity or engagement is connected and interrelated to other units, to other activities, to other proposals, to other procedures, and so forth. And so the expectations, how are we doing with that? I think we're doing fine. We can always improve everything. And I appreciate that you mentioned the core values, because the campus has just gone through a strategic planning process that was finalized, and the plan was finalized since my arrival. So I was able to participate in the tail end of that. And so a part of those core values include respect and integrity, equity and justice. Now, all the core well-being, all the core values are related to equity, diversity, and inclusion in some way, but the ones that are most explicitly stated are equity and justice, and I would say integrity and respect. We could also include well-being. And so that I'm on that steering committee, that group. We're working really hard. There's some amazing people there who are sharing ideas around first of all, what do the values mean outside of the summary, like more deeply, and what behaviors are associated with those values? What do the values of integrity, the values of respect look like? What do the values and the expressions of equity look like, or justice in the workplace, or in the labs, or in all the places we find ourselves at UMB? And so those are being developed now, and there will be a whole plan to communicate that. And in our strategic planning process for equity, diversity, and inclusion coming up, in the next few months to year, we will identify those based on feedback from you. And so it will be really important. And we look forward to engaging with you in those focus groups and online, and we'll create various forums where you can share with us, here's what we think it looks like, and here are the concerns we're having in this school or unit. And if it were this way, we would really like that. And then we'll collate all of that for a more collective, cohesive vision.
Great. We're talking about some fantastic 20,000 foot, view type issues. I don't want to miss the question that came in about something right down to earth, right where we are. And that is, we have a pretty substantial Asian American Pacific Islander community. How do you plan to address, the question is, how do you plan to address concerns about EDI specific to that community? And I think we've lost Diane. So Bill, you're on your own. Reetta, you're there.
Yeah, and so I think that, demographic groups, each race, ethnicity, there are challenges facing lots of demographic groups, and Asian Pacific Islander, those groups are not sort of like isolated on, an island. Like issues that are impacting those faculty, staff, and students are impacting other groups, in addition to the unique barriers, biases, types of discrimination that are facing them. And so they are a part of the holistic approach to identifying how different stakeholder groups on campus are being impacted differently by different policies, trainings, outcomes, as well as what are the similarly felt, like collectively felt issues and barriers faced by that group. And that goes into the strategic planning. How we connect to them is working with the student groups, affinity groups. To my knowledge, there aren't any campus level affinity groups for staff and faculty of Asian descent or nationality, but there may be some at the school levels, and then there are several at the schools and the campus-wide for students.
I know, Reetta, you've answered a couple of these questions, but maybe you want to talk about it. How can people get in touch with you? Should they get in touch with you? Why should they get in touch with you? And when will we see a website so they can, really follow and participate in what you're doing?
Yeah, so we are now in the process of designing and creating our EDI website. I don't want to give official launch date because things can happen, but once it's up and running, we will definitely communicate to the UMB community that it is up, and we can be reached, our office, at the diversity@umaryland.edu email, and I think that's the best way to reach us with. If you have ideas, if you have questions, I think it's the best way to reach us as a group.
Diane, do you
We
want to
are
say?
all back.
Yeah. We had a couple more questions, but do you want to say?
What time is it? Okay, it's 1 o'clock.
Oh,
so we can take one more question, and we apologize for that. It seems like
I'm going to read this off the other screen that froze. It's a good thing I have two computers here.
Same.
Well, this the person writes that many faculty, administrators, and students, they don't really understand what equity means. We use these terms and they mean very different things, and they can mean different things to different people. Maybe it would be useful to not just to explain to the audience, but to talk about how that's going to get transmitted to the campus community. What's the difference between equity and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great question. So first thing we can promise you, this will be defined on our website. And it will also be defined, Bill's taking notes, he's like, wait, I got it, on our website, and also in the strategic plan, we will do that as well. And so at different points when we've spoken either here or elsewhere, I've talked quite a bit about this, that equity is about understanding the historical antecedents or the barriers and disparities that exist across various groups, various identity groups, social identity groups. And so how do we know that? Are there issues related to who gets promoted, who doesn't, who is a part of the grant submission or not? Are there pay equity related issues, as in, is there a disparity across a particular rank, particular group? Inclusion can be, we can invite you to the meeting or invite you to be a part of the department, but there are disparate experiences and outcomes or processes that are happening with and for that group. And so this is why we need the data. Are there differences across genders or various groups? So this is what we collect data for, right? And so far, I think we collect data on gender, race, ethnicity, disability, and I think veteran status and some others. Now, that being said, that's not all available on our dashboard, and it's not all collected uniformly across schools and units. So this is what we're working on so that we can look at the data and see, are there differences across groups? Are people experiencing the climate differently? And so if there's a question like, I think my unit is a welcoming place, or UMB is welcoming towards people of my particular identity, name that identity. Looking then, is there a difference there? The inclusion is the involvement, the engagement of a particular group, but what we can see is that even with that, there's still disparities. So I'd be interested in learning more from you all about what your experiences are. We'll learn about this in the strategic planning process, and this is part of why we're strengthening the data dashboard and our data infrastructure, so we can learn more about these areas. And we will do more work to define the E, the D, and the I, so we don't make assumptions. Thanks for that question. And I think with that, Alex, we are at the end. I would like to say on behalf of my team in this office, thank you so much for engaging us. This will be the first of other forums that we will have throughout the year, and there will be other sessions, as Bill described, that he'll be managing and leading on the team's behalf to learn more from you about your experiences as we gather even more data. Alex, thank you again.
That's great. And please don't forget to fill out that survey, because that's where we're going to learn a lot about what's on your mind, what's important to you. So take just a minute, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.